It's time for Prove All Things, a Bible discussion program on the Word of God. A panel of preachers will deal with your questions and comments. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good, abstain from all appearance of evil, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly. Well, good evening. Good evening. I got the thumbs up here from our engineering staff. This is Prove All Things. We're glad to have you with us tonight. Looking forward to talking to you. This is number 102. It's hard for me to believe we've been doing this for so long, but the comfort I have is knowing that the first 20, 30 of our programs were pretty bad, at least in terms of half of them the sound dropped out on or the picture or whatever. But I think we're beginning to figure some of that out. Although our engineering staff told me that YouTube, which some of you are watching us on, is beginning to change the rules. They sort of go back and forth. Facebook, which some of you are watching us on, will change the rules to get rid of YouTube, and YouTube will change the rules to get rid of Facebook. So we constantly have to fight between those. But anyway, we're here. We're looking forward to talking with you, and you can get involved. We will follow the chat conversation on YouTube. There's a little red button somewhere on your screen there. Just punch that red button, and it will open up the chat, and you can chat, and the guys here will tell me what's going on, and we'll get your comments on the air and respond to them if they need responding to, or at least let everybody know what you said. If you're watching this on Facebook, you can comment. Goodness knows everybody knows how to comment on Facebook. Please don't put any pictures of your cats or dogs on. But anyway, you know how to do this. If you'd like us, that'd be great, and share that with your friends. We can get more people involved. This program brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road in Indianapolis, Indiana. You can also reach us on the phone, 317-257-3000. There's a phone instrument right in front of me, and we'll get you on the air just pretty quickly. My guest today is Brother John Hines. We had his dad on 3 weeks ago. And John is down in Haynesville, Louisiana, and he says they were relatively untouched by the recent hurricane that came through Louisiana. How are you, John?
We're doing fine, and yeah, the hurricane kind of blew east of us, up, sort of cut towards Mississippi, so we were fortunate that we didn't get the deluge or the rain that so many folks got. But it's good to be with you. Good to see you again, John.
You commented that the one benefit you got out of it was a lot of protein from insects, I believe.
Yeah. We do our part every time we go for a ride in the country. We do our part to decrease the population. But yeah, we have every bug in Louisiana, seems like right now, came up north. But if that's the worst thing that happens from those hurricanes for us, we're grateful.
You're on the migration route.
A lot of folks got it, are in our prayers, of course.
You're on the migration route for all the bugs, are you?
Yeah, not many people want to come to northern Louisiana, but I guess bugs, they're willing to trek up here.
Where is Haynesville, Louisiana?
We're 60 to 70 miles northeast of Shreveport.
Okay, so you're in the northeast corner?
We're kind of more towards the middle.
Okay.
Towards the middle, but a little bit to the west.
Just south of Arkansas.
Yeah, we're about 5 minutes from the Arkansas border.
Okay. Our other guest today is Brother Alan McKee.
Hello, John.
He's back here looking distinguished.
Ha.
Ready to go. We have a couple of questions that have already come in. One was left over from last week, and the other one somebody left on our Facebook page, which we're grateful for. We're going to go to that one first, and then we'll cover that one from last week. Penny says, what does the Bible say about kitchens in the church building? Churches already have refrigerators for the communion table items. Is it okay to have members carry in if the refrigerator is the only appliance? What about kitchens in the church building, fellas? John, you want to deal with that?
Sure. We could go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and I don't think it's a question about what appliances happen to be in a room. I don't remember reading any verses about thou shalt not have a refrigerator or things like that, but the question pertains to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And in that chapter, the brethren there in Corinth were abusing the Lord's Supper. So Paul starts talking about what they needed to come together for. There in verse 17, verse 18, 19, he talks about when you come together as a church. Verse 20, when you come together in one place, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper, meaning that they should have been coming together to eat the Lord's Supper. But later on in the account, he talks about, there at the end of the chapter, verse 34, 1 Corinthians 11:34, it says, if anyone is hungry, let him eat at home, lest you come together for judgment. When we come together with our brethren, it is not to feed our bellies. We come together to feed our souls, frankly. He says, if we're hungry, eat at home. There's nothing wrong with lasagna. There's nothing wrong with fried chicken and hamburgers or any of those things, but there's a place for them. And when we come together as the Lord's church, it is to proclaim his death until he comes. And the meal that we come together to partake of is the Lord's Supper. It is not our common supper. Those things we can do at home. Anyway, might start there if that's sufficient or whatever.
All righty. Alan, you want to comment?
I think that is pretty well, that's the key scripture there. Those Christians there in Corinth were turning the communion into a common meal. And Paul condemns them for it. He condemns them on the one hand because he points out that not everybody had food apparently. And so he said, I come together in one place. This is not to eat the Lord's Supper, for even each one takes his own supper first, and one is hungry and another drunken. So, first of all, they weren't like sharing with one another, apparently. And number two, though, he says, they came together not to eat the Lord's Supper, which was actually the purpose. The purpose was to eat the Lord's Supper. They came together, he says, not to eat the Lord's Supper. He says, as John pointed out, do you not have houses in which to eat or drink? The implication there from Paul is there is a place for having a meal. Having a meal, and that place is not inside the church building.
Well, of course, he's not talking necessarily about the church building, but in the assembly of the church.
Yeah, in the assembly of the church.
But
right.
Yes, I think that's true. But I want to point out one other thing. Somebody might say, "Well, we're not trying to supplant the Lord's Supper, but after church or on Thursday night or Saturday night, we want to come together, and the building's commodious. It has a refrigerator and perhaps some other furnishings. What would be wrong with the church having a meal on Saturday night or Thursday night or any other time?" The point I want you to see is that Paul has established a principle that the assembly of the church is not the sphere for social meals. Have you not houses to eat and drink? And that's verse 22, verse 34 that John mentioned, if you have a man hunger, let him eat at home. That's a private thing. Now, it's not saying you've got to go to your house, but it may be referring to McDonald's. You can go to McDonald's, but that's the place where you ought to be eating meals. The assembly of the church is the place where you ought to be involved in spiritual activity. And so, yes, the church has a refrigerator, but I think, Penny, as you commented in your question, they have refrigerators for the communion table items. I know at High School Road, it used to be some of our ladies would come and maybe on Saturday night or sometime, and they would prepare the communion the night before, and they would put the communion trays in some sort of refrigerated area, and or in a refrigerator, so that it'd be ready. And because grape juice goes bad, it actually turns to wine and gets a little fuzzy if you leave it out in a warm building. And in addition, of course, in the communion table items, we have leftover grape juice or opened bottles of grape juice. We'd like to preserve those and not have to throw them away every week, and so we preserve those by putting them in some sort of refrigeration. But the fact that we've got a refrigerator doesn't mean that we need to put the mayonnaise and the pickles and all those things that would be associated with a picnic in that refrigerator. Just, you can use a refrigerator for that, but that isn't the purpose. I would think that the church where you are, or the church, has a refrigerator. Of course, there's always other issues that could be raised, but this doesn't. I know that down in Houston and down in Florida right now, they've had terrible disasters. And if the church is intact and able to house people, hey, let's house them, and perhaps they need meals, and we're going to provide that for them. That's an emergency, and I think there is some room for these things in an emergency. Randy has written, and he says the issue is not eating in the church building. It is whether the church can provide the means and place for a social meal. Yes, I would. You're right, Randy, and that's a good point. I would maybe, preachers finesse over words all the time, so let me finesse that just a little bit. It is that the assembly, when we talk about the church, we're talking about the assembly. Place is incidental. The assembly was not for the eating of meals. It was for worship. It was for study, the spiritual purposes that are given in the scriptures. And the private setting, the private sector, was the area for eating social meals. If I may change that a little bit. Okay, fellers.
I would add.
Hey, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the exercises that I always like to do is to look up that word fellowship, because, for example, I preached on this topic. I think it's been a few months ago now, but I get on one of those websites looking for a background for my slides, for my PowerPoint slides. So I go to a certain website and I punch in the word fellowship. And the first things that come up are chocolate-covered donuts and picnics and ice cream socials and all of those things. And that is what the majority of religious folks think fellowship is. But when you look up that word in the Bible and you see how that word fellowship is used, it's not talking about donuts and ice cream socials. It's talking about the work of the church. It's talking about the contribution. It's talking about the distribution to needy saints. It's talking about the working of the church together. It's not talking about donuts and coffee.
Yeah, it's talking about the relationship we have with one another spiritually. The word, by the way, the word's koinonia, and it was an ordinary word when they began using it in the scriptures, so that there are some instances in the scriptures where the word fellowship refers to a partnership. For instance, Peter and his brother had fellowship in that fishing business and other things. But when it's talking about the church and the Christians, our fellowship it's talking about a spiritual relationship. It's not talking about You got one wing of the chicken and I got the other one. So, Alan,
Yes, sir.
you're unless somebody else comments here, you're the tail end on this
All
side.
right. Well, one thing too I'd have us look at would be, this is in John, the 6th chapter, and Jesus there, and starting in verse 22, the following day, the crowd standing on the other side of the sea had seen that there was no other little boat there except the one into which the disciples had entered. And when they saw that Jesus did not go with his disciples into the little boat, but that his disciples had gone away alone, however, other boats from Tiberias came near the place where they ate the loaves, the Lord having given thanks. Therefore, when the crowd saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they themselves also entered into the boats and came to Capernaum seeking Jesus. And when they had found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? Jesus answered them and said, Truly, truly, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the miracles, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. And Jesus didn't want people following him because of food. Okay? He didn't want people following him for the material things. He even tells them, do not labor for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, for the Father sealed him. And they said to him, what shall we do that we might work the works of God? And Jesus answered and said to them, this is the work of God, that you believe on him whom he has sent. Now, we got to ask ourselves the question, if we're offering, a free meal every Sunday, are we getting people in there because they're really interested in the gospel of Jesus Christ and they're really concerned about the condition of their souls and they're really anxious to be obedient to the will of God? Or are we getting them in there because, hey, I get a free meal out of this, and I like going and getting a free meal, and I'll listen to anything if I get a free food out of it.
Well, it becomes not just meals, but it becomes all this social activity.
Yes.
And we are we are in so many instances appealing to people on the basis of this social activity. We've got a ball team. We've got a kitchen. We've got a sewing circle. We've got Boy Scouts. All of that going on and provided for and promoted really by the church. And yes, you're right. It is. I wonder if we're appealing on the right basis to people. I may say some more things about this. Here's another note from Randy. He says, John Welch, I agree with you. What a godly man this is. He agreed with me. In the example you used for the emergency, to me, that would fall under the work of benevolence, yes. There is, I think, in the Scripture, a provision for emergencies. For instance, the devil tempted Jesus by taking you up to the pinnacle of the temple and say, cast yourself down, the angels will bear you up, and, quoting a prophecy in the Old Testament, the angels will bear you up so that you'll be safe. And the point of that passage in the Old Testament, Jesus rebukes him. He says, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. The point of that is that the devil was correct. That passage was in the Old Testament. It did have a legitimate function. It was true that nothing was going to happen to Jesus before the time he and his Father chose. So the point of it is that it was provided for emergencies. You might get run over by a truck any day, but Jesus wasn't going to get run over until he died on the cross for us. The angels were going to protect him and provide for him until that time. But Jesus is saying, hey, it's not for me to cause the angels to protect me. And so, but my point is that in an emergency situation, the church might act in those. Now, one of the problems that a lot of folks have is, especially when you're old as I am, John, is that I can remember my grandparents talking about they'd go to church. Of course, out in the country, they took a horse and buggy. They took a wagon out and a horse, and they would go and they'd have preaching that Sunday, and they wanted as much preaching as they could get, contrary to many churches these days. And so they'd have, and it was a long, it's a long buggy ride. And so they'd bring food with them, and they'd have dinner on the grounds after the morning service, and then they'd have another service maybe in the afternoon after they have dinner. And so people want to know, what was that wrong? Was that sinful for them to do that? And of course, I used to, back in the day, have my office in the building, and I would sneak in lunch. I'd go get lunch and sit in my office and eat it. And there have been times where we had a work party in the building, and we were all cleaning or painting or polishing or whatever, and somebody would go out and buy donuts and pass out the donuts to everybody that was working. These are quibbles that are brought up to justify the installation of a kitchen and a permanent arrangement of meals in the building and so forth. But what about those? Can you speak to those things? Are they on a par? Or are we being inconsistent in what we do? Just feel free, fellas. Take one into that. John?
I would say there is, and you already pointed out there in 1 Corinthians 11, he says, when you come together. And folks have to understand that there is a time when we come together. James talks about if the rich man comes into your assembly, and there's other places that show that as well. And you eating lunch in your office, is that the church coming together in your office? No. And folks need to recognize the difference between the two things. What's happening anymore is denominations and other folks are saying this is the church doing this is a work of the church. Come grab your chocolate covered cream filled donuts and coffee, and they're calling it this is a fellowship meal, and it's a work of the church, and it's not a work of the church.
Okay, Randy joins on again. He says these situations are vastly different. He didn't underline that. I did that for him. Vastly different than coming together to have good times and calling it fellowship. Alan?
I think he's got a point. I think there is a Bible meaning of fellowship. It has to do with our joining together in worship to God. And, you and I sitting down over a bowl of chili on a Friday night or something like that, is that fellowship? I don't think so. That's not, at least not the way the Bible thinks of it. The Bible speaks of it. You and I enjoy one another's company, I think, but when we fellowship, we are gathering together with the other brothers and sisters in Christ. We're singing praises to God. We are studying His Word. We are taking the communion together. That's fellowship. Praying together.
And people do get that confused. I do know my grandparents did this sort of thing. They did have dinner on the grounds, but it wasn't the church that provided the dinner on the grounds. It wasn't the church that arranged it. Sometimes, I suppose, if push came to shove, they'd take the doors off the building and put them on some sort of trestle or table so they had a table. But it wasn't the church doing those things. That's one of the reasons I tried to stress, and somebody else was writing, maybe Randy, somebody else, that the passage isn't talking necessarily about the church building. It's talking about the church itself, that organization, that corporate group. And the corporate group of the church has no business involving itself in arranging social meals and affairs. That should be done in the private sector. What have you not houses to eat and drink in? So that principle seems to be laid down there in 1 Corinthians 11. We appreciate your question, Penny. It's at Andy. In fact, nobody, I don't think, in the 100 episodes we have, I don't think we've talked about that one until just now. I appreciate it. If you disagree.
Hey, John, can I add something else?
Sure.
Just thinking about Jesus cleansing the temple, and it's such a familiar passage that sometimes, at least for myself, I kind of forget that certain aspects of it. It seems strange to back up and ask, why did Jesus cleanse the temple when in some 30 or 40 years the temple was going to be destroyed anyway? And what he was doing was, I think he was setting the stage for the church, for his true Father's house. And the things that he cleansed from the temple, it was not wrong to sell those animals so that folks could sacrifice. One of the problems was where they were doing it. They should not have been doing it there. They were turning his Father's house into a common place. So to look at all the parallel accounts, people were actually cutting through the temple or the courtyards and just treating it in a common style. So he ushers them out, and he says, and you see what he starts doing in the temple. And he taught there, and it was a house of prayer, and it was a house of praise. And that's what he wanted his Father's house to do. It wasn't wrong to sell those animals. The problem was where they were doing it. It was not the right place.
Well, I pointed out too in a sermon recently, it wasn't wrong for them. When they contributed the temple tax, they had to contribute that to the temple in Jewish money, in a Jewish denarius. It wasn't a denarius; it was shekel. Jewish shekel. And so they had to have people there exchanging money. And Jesus doesn't condemn them for exchanging money. The point was they were making a profit out of it. They had gone into business there. And you see that also in a lot of churches. They go into business. They're selling stuff. They're having bazaar. Just down from us, there's a church that has a big, it's not a circus, but a big carnival every year. And they do that to make money. And the church isn't doing that. That's not how the church obtains its funds, by selling stuff.
Yeah, and then you get into that discussion. As you said, they'll have their fellowship meals for $9.95 to fund their mission trip to Jamaica this year.
Yeah.
And as you said, where does the church have the authority to bring in funds that way?
Well, a lot of churches will have a concert or a special speaker, and they'll be selling tickets to the thing. So you got to buy tickets to hear the concert, or the special speaker will be selling books in the back of the building. He'll have written some book, or they'll have recorded some DVD, and you're supposed to go back and buy that. Where in the world do you see that in the New Testament? Michelle has joined us, and she says, thank you for pointing out, Alan, that eating chili together on Friday night is not fellowship. Not fellowship. She did capitalize that. Too many times Christians claim they're having fellowship every time they get together as individuals. And we appreciate that, Michelle. I think Alan would say thank you for the amen.
I happened to look at this. This was out of Acts 2:42. They continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and in fellowship and in breaking of bread and in prayers. And the word that's
used there for fellowship is a partnership, a communion, a participation. And so you and me sitting down eating a bowl of chili together is not the church in fellowship. That requires a deeper sense of interaction.
Well, you were reading verse 42 in Acts 2.
Yes.
Read just a little bit further. Verse 42 is speaking of their spiritual relationship. Verse 46 is speaking of their social relationship. They, continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house. They were eating meals together, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. They were together, they enjoyed one another, but they were not eating their meals there together as a church. They were breaking bread from house to house. Whereas up in verse 42, their breaking bread there is referring to the Lord's Supper. They're partaking of that, just as Paul's been telling us in 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter. All right. I think we beat that one to death. Unless somebody else has a question or comment, we'd be glad for you to do that. Feel free. You don't have to agree with us. Feel free to disagree. We had this question last week. This came in. Are there any Bible accounts where angels are feminine in nature? Are they all men? Go ahead. Are you the angel expert? Which one are you
not
guys?
Me, boss.
Okay. I got a feeling I get stuck with this because I knew about it in advance. No, there are no Bible accounts where angels are referred to as a feminine. They're always referred to as masculine. There may be a lot of reasons about that. I want you to think about it. Now, there's only one or two arguments made to the contrary. One of those is in Zechariah, the 5th chapter. I'm going to get papers off my desk so I can get my computer Bible up here and read that to you fairly quickly. If one of you guys beats me there, go right ahead. Zechariah, the 5th chapter? Verse 9, Then lifted I up mine eyes and looked, and behold, there came out two women, and the wind was in their wings. For they had wings like the wings of a stork, and they lifted up the ephah between the earth and heaven. I would tell you about that passage. This passage is cited by some as a Bible example of angels that are female. The problem with that is that this passage in Zechariah is a series of visions. You need to notice that. Number one, in verse 1, there's a flying scroll that's talked about in this. That's a vision. It's not something real. In verse 2, the dimensions of that scroll are 20 cubits long and 10 cubits wide. So it's a great big carpet, big flying carpet. In verses 3 and 4, that scroll represents a curse upon those who steal and those who swear falsely by God's name. In verse 5 through 8, a woman is personified as wickedness. Probably nobody wants to know about that. In verse 9, two women come out with wind in their wings. And in verse 10 through 11, the women are going to build a temple. The problem you have with this passage is it is in a visionary chapter, and it never refers to these two women as angels. The only place you can probably grab onto that angel thing is the wings. And other than that, it's a vision. There is no reference to it.
John, I remember this passage when we studied Ezekiel many years ago, or Zechariah rather, Zechariah many years ago.
Yep.
And I know that a lot of the Bible scholars that I was looking at were virtually divided whether these women were angelic or demonic. So flip a coin, I suppose, as to whether you want them to be angelic or demonic.
Okay. The engineer Dave, did you have something else?
I was forgetting to look at YouTube. We have some comments on YouTube.
Okay, go ahead.
Ed writes, Bible fellowship is one thing, but people often use the dictionary definition of fellowship. And then
He's meaning Webster's dictionary, yeah.
Yeah, and then you went to the next subject, and he said Zechariah 5:9. And now he says, are angels genderless? Matthew 22:30.
There is a lot of people try to argue that. I appreciate you bringing it up. I was going there myself just a second. A lot of people try to argue that the angels are genderless because Matthew, 22?
22:30.
22:30 says that in heaven they're neither married nor given in marriage. The only problem is every Bible reference to them says they're male. It doesn't say they're its. It says they're male. It speaks of them as male. Michael the archangel, he did this, and so forth. Now, I don't know the nature of these beings. I don't know that in heaven they're neither married nor given in marriage. That's what that passage in Matthew 22 says. I don't know the nature of these beings or the relationships. Apparently, I assume, because they're not given in marriage, that they don't procreate somehow or another. I suppose God can create more angels if he wants them. But no, I wouldn't argue that they're genderless, because the Bible says, remember, that's what we're going by, the Bible says they are male. Now, some of the reasons for that, may I suggest, may be the notion of authority, that the male would have had authority, and that perhaps is why they are represented in the scriptures as males, because they would have been men dealing with situations. Go ahead. Alan, you got something else here on your...
Are you watching YouTube?
Are you on YouTube? Or?
Yeah, I'm watching YouTube and looking verses up as well. So
Okay.
YouTube, here's a few more things from Ed Rangel. It says there will be no marriage in heaven. We will be
Like the angels. Yeah, you just talked about
That's
that.
right.
He says gender in language, but then is not to be understood strictly in terms of sexuality.
That's right.
I think that's accurate. And it says maybe the gender pronoun applied to the angels is more a reference to authority than sex. So that's where you were
the point
going.
I was making. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think those are good points. Huh?
Yeah.
You should have read that before I said it.
Well, I was looking at Daniel at that point, and
you and I could have just amened him.
yeah, we could have just. We need to get him on here.
I know that.
The rascal
Tell him now. Here, I'll tell him. Ed, you're on this program next week. Enough of this. We're going to get you on here, and John can ask you questions.
Yeah, he's sitting there hiding in the weeds and firing questions. Well, let's put him on the firing line.
Get ready. We're going to be coming to you next week. Ed preaches down on the south side of Indianapolis. A good man, a good teacher down there. Did you find the passage you're looking for?
I had it and then I lost it. So hang on, I'll get it back again.
I've said that so many times in life. Johnny, what about you?
He wrote again. He says, I think.
The only thing I'd add, that verse about that we are not given in marriage,
Yes.
and I think one of the reasons for that is because the church is the bride of Christ. It's not that there is no marriage in heaven, it's that there's only one marriage in heaven. It's Jesus and his church.
That's a good
And
point.
we are devoted to him, and you have that relationship.
Well, of course, the place where Jesus uses that, you remember, is the woman who had 7 husbands in succession and
Right.
was childless throughout the whole thing, and talking about levirate marriage. And Jesus responds, in heaven they neither marry nor are given in marriage, so that whole levirate marriage thing is not true. I've seen so many couples. I saw some guy today waxing the elephant about how much he loved his wife, which is okay. I've been known to do that once or twice, a long time ago. But he said in the course of it that he would love her forever. And I'm sure he will, but at the same time, a lot of married couples have the idea they're going to be married in heaven. And there isn't any marriage in heaven. I have no doubt. I hope both of you make it to heaven, and I have no doubt that you will love one another in heaven. But that passage still says there's no marriage there, in the sense that that levirate marriage, in the sense of that the passage is talking about. You're right, though. The only marriage that the Bible speaks about in heaven is the Lord and his church. So, we appreciate it. You can get through to us right away. In case you've been missing it, we are following YouTube. If you look for the chat button on YouTube, you can get in here. You do not have to agree. This isn't just a mutual admiration thing. We will admire you for disagreeing. We appreciate that. There's a lot of people who disagree religiously about these topics and others, and we'd be glad to hear from you about those things. You can reach us, just look for that chat button on YouTube. On Facebook, everybody knows how to comment on Facebook. Just say something, disagree, say something. And the phone is open. Nobody ever really wants to get their voice on this thing.
Ed is writing about Genesis 18
Okay, go ahead.
and verse 1
Genesis 18 and verse 1.
and following.
So,
Okay, I'm headed there.
and this is where these two figures, these two individuals,
Yeah, 2 men.
meet up with Abraham,
Yeah.
and maybe this is going forward with this angels being male. Yeah, every
Yeah.
time we seem to encounter angels, they are male.
Yeah, it's consistent through the Bible. The only hope you had was that passage in Zechariah, and it doesn't even mention angels. It mentions 2 women. Go ahead. Is there something else there?
Let me check back.
Engineer Dave is nodding at me. Go ahead. Engineer Dave, we'll get you
He
on.
says the 3 that appeared to Abraham. Who were they, and how do we know?
Oh, the 3 that appeared to Abraham in Genesis 18. Who were they, and how do we know?
He says not 2, 3.
Yes, there were 3 men. Verse 2 says there were 3 men. Of course, usually people say 2 because only 2 of them, I believe, went down to Sodom. I believe that's right. Whereas, I don't know where the 3rd one went, but 2 of them went down to Sodom. I'm going to find that, and so I can not be completely wrong every time I comment. Oh, baby, come on, where is it?
Well, in 19.
Yeah, it's maybe in 19. Yeah,
so
2
there
angels.
came 2 angels to Sodom.
Yeah,
So there were 3 that left from Abraham, but 2 that showed up in Sodom.
yeah, and in Genesis 18:2 it calls them men.
Yes.
3 men stood by him. Who were they, John? Hadn't been talking for a while. I suppose you don't know their names exactly, but who were they?
Who, as far as I've always thought that, there in chapter 18, verse 1, it says, "Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre." I always thought it was the Lord and 2 angels. And then the 2 angels go on while the Lord has that conversation with Abraham, and Abraham intercedes. The whole, are you going to destroy it for 40, 30, 20, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I've always thought that was the case. But anyway, the Lord, angels, appeared as men. Doesn't look like, one of the verses in the New Testament says, "Do not forget to entertain or to be hospitable to strangers, for some have entertained angels unawares." And I'm not sure if it's specifically talking about this account, but it sure does make me think of it. That there Abraham is, and he, as it says, he just lifted his eyes and he looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. Not sure how much Abraham knew at that point, but of course he comes to realize who he's talking to when they start talking about the son of promise and Isaac, and he realizes it. But anyway, it's an interesting account. Don't know what more to say other than the Lord spoke to him and the angels were there.
There's 2 or 3 possible explanations. I'm going to get those out, and then we're going to go to, apparently there's another comment here. This may well be one of those instances. There is a character throughout the Old Testament, and into the New for that matter, to some extent, that's referred to in the New, called the angel of Jehovah. And it's a character throughout the Old Testament who appears. And that angel is oftentimes referred to as deity, and as it is worshipped. And you of course know that most of the angels, for instance in Revelation, John tries to worship an angel, and the angel refuses, said, "I'm one of thy servants." But the angel of Jehovah is worshipped on occasion. And so a lot of times I remember, or here in Genesis 18, the argument is that the Lord, as it refers to him here, is either an angel serving as an ambassador of the Lord and therefore being referred to as the Lord, or it is this angel of Jehovah, who I personally, I wouldn't stake my life on it, but I think there's pretty good proof for it, is an Old Testament reference to Jesus himself. And I personally think this Lord figure, the third figure here, is a reference to Jesus, who, of course, in the New Testament, we're told he created the world. They drank of that, 1 Corinthians 10, they drank of that spiritual rock which followed them, and that rock was Christ. Christ was circulating around and among them. He wasn't known as Christ in the Old Testament. I think he was known as the angel of Jehovah. But you ask who that is the best opinion I can give to you on that. And that is opinion. I couldn't prove it, I don't suppose, if my life depended on it. But I have studied a little bit. I don't have time to drag out all the evidence. I can't drag it all out right now. But I would suggest to you that's who it's a reference to. The other two apparently went on down to Sodom, and this character here in the early part of Genesis 18, who's identified as the Lord, did not go down. And so there's the thought. Now then, go ahead. Engineer Dave's pointing at you, Alan.
Ed writes and says,
I think that all three are deity based on Genesis 18, 22, 20, 19, 1, and 18. And it is my opinion also. So,
Question
All right.
right above that.
oh, question?
There's
Does he refer to all three as Lord in verse 3?
Oh, let me look there. And said, My Lord, if I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away. I personally think one of these beings was, one of these angels was sort of the representative and the speaker. And apparently it's singular. He refers to him in the singular throughout this, and his conversation is with this individual. Although all three of them, he prepares a meal, all three of them eat with him, and two of them continue and one doesn't. So, what did he say? In 19 they're referred to as Lord? I had never noticed that. Yeah, in 19:2 he says, Behold now my lords turn in. If you'll notice, I can't tell you this right now because I don't have it, but my guess is that word lords, plural, in Genesis 19 is a different word. I'm saying that because it's just in lowercase here. Let me see. You guys can fill in here while I stutter.
It says okay. In a version I read, it reads sirs in 18:3.
Yeah.
it is not the same word.
It is not the same word.
The word, well, they're related, apparently.
Yeah.
They are related words.
Yeah.
In 18:3, it is Adonai.
Adonai,
Which
it's
is an
Adon
emphatic
in
form.
19.
Yes. It's emphatic. I don't know. I'm not up on Greek text or
Yeah.
Greek verb to know what emphatic means versus regular, but apparently there was some best emphasis placed on it.
Yeah, maybe so. Okay, here's something else. Does the term angel always refer to a spiritual being? No. Real quickly, John used a passage just a minute ago. I think, what patches did you use? I was going to comment about it and we got sort of sidetracked, but anyway, look with me over in James, the 2nd chapter, where it's in verse 25. Likewise also was not Rahab the harlot. You used the passage in Hebrews about some had received angels unawares. I remember what it was. And yes, I too also key on this incident with Abraham for that. But there's another one in James 2 and verse 25. Likewise also was not Rahab the harlot justified by works when she had received the messengers and it sent them out another way. And that word messenger there is the word angel. And of course, those guys were the spies who came in to spy out the land, who were hidden by Rahab. And so the word can, and I picked out one instance, you can find 4 or 5 others in the New Testament where the word is translated messenger. In fact, if you look at some lexicon, you'll see the different ways the word angelos is translated.
Yeah, Matthew 24:31. He shall send out
His angels with a great sound of a trumpet. Well, the angels there says could be by implication a pastor, a messenger,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's not a
Yeah.
necessarily a reference to a heavenly being.
So no, it was not always a heavenly spiritual being. This again is, as so many New Testament words, were common words, and the majority of times it's used, the vast majority of times it's used in the Bible, it is a reference to a heavenly being, but it is not exclusively so. Anywho, man, I appreciate your questions and comments. That's really
Hey,
good.
John?
Yes, go ahead.
I was looking back at the question about Genesis 19:2 and when Lot calls them lords.
Okay.
And I was just going to refer back to earlier in chapter 18. It's the account where Sarah calls Abraham Lord. And it's the same word there. But anyway, to just show that every time the word Lord is used does not necessarily mean deity.
Right.
That it could be, it has submission and authority and things like that, and reverence as well. Not reverence to deity, not worship, but just as far as Sarah called Abraham Lord, she submitted to him and recognized him, if you will.
That's a good point. I appreciate it. Okay. Have things died down a little bit on... Okay. I appreciate it. If you would like to get on these discussions or start something new, we'd be appreciated very much. We'd be glad to have you.
Hey, John, can I bring something up that's...
You got to wait till next week when Ed's here. No, go ahead. I'm kidding you.
A lot of folks, these hurricanes that are happening and earthquakes and fires out west and various things, a lot of folks are saying that is God doing those things. How would you answer people who say that?
Well, I would say yes to a certain extent. God created the earth. But the Bible says He brings in Matthew, He says He brings His sunshine and rain on the just and the unjust. So, yes, God does it. He created the world. It does have seismic events, earthquakes. It does have volcanoes. It does have thunderstorms. It does have hurricanes and tornadoes. But God is not using any of those things to punish any particular individual. I think that's the point about He brings that sunshine and rain on everybody indiscriminately. So in terms of, that's like saying, but why do we have disease? Well, we have disease. I think much of it is a result of our sin. The Lord cursed us because of our sin, so that we wouldn't live forever. Now, I don't know all the nature of that curse, but some of it had to involve disease, aging and disease. So in the remotest sense, yes, God does it, but He didn't pick Houston out individually and say, I'm going to wipe out everything south of Houston. And He didn't pick out the Keys. It's that He created the earth in such a manner that these storms exist, just like rain exists, and just like the sun, Should we be mad because the Sahara Desert is baked by the sun and doesn't get much rain? That's the way He created the earth, and we'll sort of have to live with that. It's part of the nature of His creation. That's the best answer I can give to it. I'm going to find that passage in a minute. I've referred. Yeah, it's in Matthew. It's in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5:45. He says when he tells us to thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. You have heard it said. This is 43. I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and the unjust. So he provided for that. And there is a passage, and I can't find it right here under the gun, in the Old Testament where it says God brings evil. I can't even quote it exactly. Somebody will hopefully write me and tell me about it. But the point of that passage is in the process of creation that there were bad things just as there's good things created here on this earth. Somebody commented, Randy says, I tend to agree, John. Uh-oh. He was agreeing with me before. Now he only tends to agree. Uh-oh. In Hebrews 2, in reference to the word spoken through angels, I believe this refers to the prophets of old that declared the law. You know, I'm about to write an article on that, Randy, and I might be disagreeing with you. But anyway, we'll work on that. Okay, Ed's back over here.
He says, I would answer the hurricane question this way.
He has allowed the disasters to happen. Also, these hurricanes have focused on our nation on humanitarian efforts and not so much on killing each other.
That would be good. I'm not sure that's why he brought the hurricane to us.
And both he and a fellow named Jeff that we know have chimed in with Isaiah 45:7.
Oh, is that the passage I was referring to?
That may be the one that you're looking
if
for.
If one of you meets me to Isaiah 45, go right ahead. I don't have exclusive use of Isaiah 45. What did he say, 45:7? Yeah. He says, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. He's not talking about the devil and sinful things or tempting us. He's talking about these bad things that happen. Rain. My goodness, most of what happened to Houston was rain. Most of the time when it rains, we're happy. We're having a drought here in Indiana right now. We're sort of hoping we get the leftovers of that hurricane in Florida, just a little bit. So
I think we did. We got about 2 minutes worth of rain on my drive home.
Okay. But I appreciate you guys for calling that passage to our attention. John, we're running out of time. Tell us where that church is. We know Haynesville. We know it's just south of Arkansas. What's the address and what time and where are you going to worship?
The building we meet at 4199 Louisiana Alternate 2 here in town, here in Haynesville, Louisiana 71038. If you need to put it into GPS or whatnot, you can check out our website at woodlandchurchofchrist.org, and you can find our times on there. We meet Sunday mornings 9:30 and that night at 6 o'clock, Wednesday night 7 o'clock.
Are you still doing that daily manna thing?
No, we got away from that.
I know you're going to school some to learn.
I was tired of preaching to the choir.
Well, okay then. Well, that was good. Some of those were really good. I didn't watch all of them, I'll admit, but I did watch some. It was good when you did them. So one of these days, get back to it. I appreciate having you on. This program is brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis. And we're going to be meeting tomorrow night at 7:30. We're going to be studying in the book of Hebrews. We're cranking that off tomorrow night. I hope that you will come be with us. And we're going to be meeting at 9:30 on Sunday morning, 3103 North High School Road. And Alan McKee's teaching that adult class in
1 Corinthians, the 9th chapter.
1 Corinthians 9. And then at 10:30 we'll have our worship service. and another worship service at 6 in the evening. It's been good to be with you today. I appreciated the discussion. If the Lord wills, we'll be back with you again. Good day to you.
Thanks for having me, John.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it.